Ayana had always been a woman of quiet strength. Born and raised in the heart of a peaceful village, she knew nothing beyond the golden fields that swayed gently in the wind and the rivers that carried whispers of forgotten stories. Her people were farmers, living off the land, working from dawn to dusk, their hands calloused but their hearts full. It was a life of simplicity and routine, one that Ayana had come to accept with grace. She often walked the narrow dirt paths winding between the huts, greeting elders with a respectful nod and laughing with children who ran barefoot through the fields. Ayana was beloved for her kindness, always willing to help those in need. If an elderly neighbor needed water, she fetched it. If a child scraped a knee, she was the first to comfort them. But beneath her warm smile, a quiet longing stirred in her heart. She dreamed of love, not just any love, but the kind that filled the soul and made life extraordinary. Still, she was a realist. In her village, love was not always a matter of the heart, it was a matter of survival. Marriages were arranged for security and tradition, not passion. Like the women before her, she expected to marry a farmer, build a home, and raise children who would one day work the land as she did. There was comfort in predictability, and she had come to accept that her life would unfold as her mothers and grandmothers had. Then one day a stranger arrived. Malik was unlike the men of the village. He had the strong build of a farmer, his muscles honed by years of hard labor, yet there was something different about him. Something unspoken, something that set him apart. His deep brown eyes held a quiet intensity, as though he had seen more than he let on. His voice was calm, measured, but his words carried weight as though he chose them carefully. He spoke little of his past, revealing only that he had lost his family and had come in search of a fresh start. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He worked harder than any man in the fields, never complaining, never faltering. He helped the elderly without being asked, and when he smiled, it was as if a rare sunbeam had broken through the clouds. The village elders watched him with curiosity, but no one questioned a man who labored with such honesty. When he asked for a wife, Ayana's family saw an opportunity. He was strong, hardworking, and carried himself with quiet dignity. He would be a good provider, a good husband. Though Ayana barely knew him, she found herself agreeing when her father told her of the arrangement. It was the way of things. Marriage first, love later. As the wedding preparations began, Ayana told herself she was content. After all, she had wished for love and Malik was kind. What more could she ask for? Little did she know, her new husband carried a secret that would change not only her life but the fate of an entire kingdom. The wedding was exactly as Ayana had expected. Simple yet beautiful in its own way. The entire village gathered to celebrate as was tradition, bringing gifts of grain, woven fabrics, and clay pots to help the new couple start their life together. Women sang songs of love and devotion, their voices rising in harmony with the rhythm of the drums. The men danced in a circle, their feet kicking up dust as they clapped in time with the beat. Ayana wore a dress of deep red, embroidered with golden patterns that shimmered under the setting sun. Her mother adorned her with intricate beads and whispered blessings into her ear. Malik stood tall beside her, dressed in a traditional tunic, his expression calm but unreadable. When the elders recited their vows, he spoke his lines with steady conviction, and when the ceremony ended, he placed a reassuring hand on Ayana's shoulder. Despite the joyous occasion, Ayana couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. She had seen many weddings before, yet Malik's presence carried an air of quiet mystery. He smiled when expected, nodded when spoken to, but there was a guardedness about him, a restraint in his movements. After the wedding, they settled into their new life together. Their home was modest, a small hut on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by fields Malik now called his own. Every morning he rose before the sun, toiling in the fields from dawn until dusk. He never complained, never hesitated. He worked harder than any man Ayana had ever known, plowing the earth with precision, his muscles moving with an effortless grace. The villagers admired him. A fine man, the elders would say. A good husband for Ayana. And indeed he was. He treated her with respect, never raising his voice, never demanding more than she was willing to give. He listened when she spoke and ensured she had everything she needed. Slowly, Ayana found herself settling into this life, into the quiet comfort of Malik's presence. Yet there were moments that unsettled her. His reflexes were too quick, unnaturally so. One evening as they sat outside their hut, a pot slipped from Ayana's hands. Before she could react, Malik had caught it midair with the speed of a striking cobra. She laughed nervously, brushing it off as coincidence, but the memory lingered. There were other strange occurrences. Once, a group of elders sat discussing the history of the region, struggling to recall the name of an old ruler. Malik, who had lived in the village for only a short time, answered with certainty. His knowledge was vast, too vast for a mere farmer. When Ayana questioned him about his past, he would only smile and say, "That life is behind me." At night, she would catch him staring at the stars as if searching for something. And sometimes, when he thought she was asleep, she could hear him whispering in a language she did not recognize. Ayana wanted to trust him. He had given her no reason not to. Yet deep in her heart, she knew one thing for certain. Her husband was hiding something. And whatever it was, it would soon change everything. The whispers began subtly at first. Small murmurs passed between villagers when they thought no one was listening. Ayana noticed it during market days, when the women gathered to grind grain and discuss the village's affairs. They spoke in hushed voices, eyes darting toward her as they exchanged curious glances. "That man? He moves like a warrior, not a farmer," one woman murmured. "Have you seen how he carries himself?" another added. "Too disciplined, too refined. There's something about him that doesn't fit here." Ayana pretended not to hear, but the words clung to her thoughts like burrs. She had sensed it too, the way Malik's hands, though calloused from labor, held a steadiness and precision that seemed unnatural for a simple farmer. Then one fateful night she saw something that confirmed her suspicions. It was late, the moon casting long shadows over the fields. Ayana had stirred from her sleep, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She reached for Malik, but his side of the mat was empty. Frowning, she rose and stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. A faint glow flickered in the distance near the tree line. Quietly, she made her way toward it, careful not to snap any twigs underfoot. What she saw stole the breath from her lungs. Malik stood alone in the clearing, his back to her. In his hands he held a long, curved blade, gleaming in the moonlight. With effortless grace, he moved through a series of intricate sword techniques, his body flowing like water. The blade sliced through the air with silent precision, faster than Ayana's eyes could follow. Each movement was controlled, disciplined, nothing like the clumsy swings of the village hunters. She had never seen anything like it. Her heart pounded as she took a step closer. A twig cracked beneath her foot. In an instant, Malik spun, his sword raised in defense. His eyes, usually warm and kind, were sharp as a predator's. But the moment he saw her, the edge in his gaze softened. He lowered the blade, exhaling slowly. "Ayana," he said, his voice even. "You shouldn't be here." Her throat was dry, but she forced herself to speak. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" For a long moment, Malik said nothing. Then he turned away, sheathing the sword in a hidden scabbard. "I had to leave my old life behind," he finally said. "That's all you need to know." "But why? Who were you before you came here?" Malik met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "The past is dangerous, Ayana. Some things are better left buried." That night, she lay awake beside him, questions churning in her mind. The man she had married was no ordinary farmer. And if he was keeping secrets, she had to find out why. The answer came sooner than she expected. A few days later, a weary traveler arrived in the village, a man with a scarred face and tired eyes. He limped toward the marketplace, his cloak tattered from long travels. When his gaze landed on Malik, he froze, his eyes widening in shock. Then, to Ayana's astonishment, the man dropped to one knee and bowed. "Your Highness," the traveler breathed, his voice filled with reverence. Malik's entire body tensed. His hand instinctively went to his side, where, if he had been armed, his sword would have rested. He took a slow step forward, shaking his head. "You must be mistaken," he said calmly, but there was a sharpness in his tone that Ayana had never heard before. The traveler looked up, confusion etched on his face. "But, my lord, it's you. I would recognize you anywhere. We searched for you after the coup. Your people thought you were dead." A hushed silence fell over the market. Ayana's breath hitched as she watched the scene unfold. Malik clenched his jaw and stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "You will not speak of this again," he said. "Forget you ever saw me." The traveler hesitated but nodded solemnly, his face clouded with unspoken words. He turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ayana with only one undeniable truth. Her husband was not just a farmer. He was a king in hiding. The night was calm, the village resting under a sky full of stars. Ayana had just finished tending to the evening fire when a distant cry shattered the peaceful silence. Then came the pounding of hooves, the clash of steel, and the unmistakable scent of smoke filling the air. A wave of fear crashed over her as she rushed to the doorway. In the dim torchlight she saw shadows moving between the huts. Armed men, strangers, stalked the village like predators on a hunt. Their faces were hidden behind dark scarves, their swords glinting under the moon. "We are looking for someone," one of them bellowed, his voice rough like grinding stone. "Bring him to us and no harm will come to you." The villagers, caught off guard, cowered in fear. Fathers clutched their children, mothers held their breath, and elders exchanged uncertain glances. Ayana's heart pounded. Who were they looking for? Then she saw Malik. He was standing just outside their home, his body tense, his eyes locked on the intruders. There was no fear in his expression, only a quiet, controlled fury. "Search every house," the leader ordered. One of the raiders lunged toward an elderly man, grabbing him by the collar. "Tell us where he is." Before Ayana could react, Malik moved. He struck with blinding speed, grabbing the raider's wrist and twisting it sharply. A sickening crack echoed in the night. The man cried out in pain, dropping his weapon. The other raiders turned in shock. Malik stepped forward, his movements fluid and powerful. When the next attacker rushed him, Malik ducked, grabbed a wooden staff from the ground and swung it with perfect precision. The man fell instantly, knocked unconscious. Ayana watched in disbelief. This wasn't the clumsy self-defense of a desperate man. This was battle-hardened skill. Malik moved like a warrior, each strike measured, each dodge effortless. The attackers hesitated, stepping back. Then one of them gasped. "It's him," he whispered. The leader narrowed his eyes. "Impossible. The prince is dead." "No," another man said, fear creeping into his voice. "Look at him. It's Prince Cairo." The name struck the village like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs filled the air. Ayana felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Prince?" She looked at her husband, searching his face for answers. But he wasn't looking at her. He was watching the raiders, his jaw clenched, his breathing steady. The attackers, now uncertain, exchanged nervous glances. "We should fall back," one of them muttered. "We weren't told he was still alive." Their leader hesitated, then snarled. "This isn't over." With that, he signaled to his men, and like a tide receding, they disappeared into the night, leaving behind wounded comrades and a shaken village. For a long moment there was only silence. Then all eyes turned to Malik. The village elder stepped forward. "Prince Cairo?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Malik exhaled deeply and turned to Ayana. She could see the truth in his eyes before he even spoke. "Ayana," he said, his voice softer now. "We need to talk." She followed him inside their home, her mind racing. She had known he was hiding something, but royalty? "Oh, Prince?" Malik sat down, rubbing his forehead. "I wanted to tell you," he admitted. I couldn't." "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely steady. He looked up at her. "My real name is Cairo," he said. "I am, or was, the prince of the kingdom of Arisa." Ayana's breath caught. The kingdom of Arisa was once the greatest in the land, but years ago, it had fallen under a ruthless coup. The royal family had been slaughtered. The prince had been declared dead. "But how?" she asked. "You survived." Malik, Cairo, nodded. "Barely. My father's most loyal guards smuggled me out the night of the attack. They told the world I had died so I could live." Ayana's chest tightened. "And you never thought to tell me?" "I didn't want to bring danger to this village," he said. "I didn't want to bring danger to you." "But they found you anyway," she whispered. Cairo nodded grimly. "Yes. And now they will return." Ayana felt a chill run down her spine. Their quiet life had just shattered. The man she had married was no mere farmer. He was a prince in exile. And now his enemies knew he was still alive. The small hut that had been Ayana's sanctuary now felt like a fragile shell, too small to contain the weight of the truth Malik had just revealed. He was no simple farmer. He was a prince, the rightful heir to the throne of Arisa. And his past was far darker than she had ever imagined. Ayana sat across from him, her hands gripping the wooden table as she tried to steady herself. The oil lamp between them flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, as if even the light struggled to comprehend the enormity of what had been spoken. "Start from the beginning," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. Malik, Cairo, nodded, exhaling deeply. "My father, King Adewale, ruled Orisa with wisdom and strength," he began. "Our kingdom thrived. The people were prosperous. We were respected, even feared by our enemies. But there was one man who wanted more, my uncle, Lord Zuberi." His jaw tightened at the name. Ayana had heard the tales. Zuberi, the king's ambitious younger brother, had been a cunning strategist, always lurking in the shadows of Orisa's court. Rumors of his thirst for power had reached even the quiet farming villages. Malik continued. He wasn't satisfied with being second in line. He wanted the throne. He fed lies to the nobles, convincing them that my father had grown weak. He forged alliances with our enemies, promising them land and wealth in exchange for their support. And then one night, when the palace was at its most vulnerable, he struck. Ayana's breath caught in her throat. They came in the dead of night, assassins, mercenaries, traitors. The palace guards fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. My father, my mother, my little sister. His voice broke slightly, but he swallowed hard and continued. They were all slaughtered. Ayana's eyes burned with unshed tears. I should have died with them, Malik admitted. But my father's most loyal general, Commander Django, saved me. He pulled me from my bed, covered me in the blood of our fallen guards, and smuggled me out through the hidden tunnels beneath the palace. He told me I had to disappear. If I lived, the kingdom still had a chance. For a long moment, there was only silence between them. So you ran, Ayana whispered. I had no choice, Malik said. If Zuberi had known I was alive, he would have hunted me to the ends of the earth. For years, I lived in hiding, moving from village to village, keeping my identity a secret. I trained, I waited, but I never intended to return. Not like this. He looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. I never wanted to bring danger to you, Ayana. I never wanted to involve you in this. Ayana shook her head slowly. You think you can decide that? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. You think you can carry this burden alone? He frowned. I didn't want you to have to make that choice. But I've already made it, she said firmly. The moment I married you, I became part of your life. Who you were, who you are, and who you are meant to be. Malik's expression was unreadable, but Ayana could see the conflict in his eyes. He had spent so long believing he had to fight his battles alone. Now he had to accept that she would stand beside him no matter the cost. The people of Orisa, she continued, they've been living under your uncle's rule for years. If he was cruel enough to murder his own family for the throne, what has he done to the kingdom since? Malik hesitated, then spoke grimly. I've heard stories. Heavy taxes. Executions of anyone who speaks against him. Orisa has become a kingdom ruled by fear. Ayana clenched her fists. Then they need their true king. They need you. It's not that simple, Malik said. Zuberi has an army. He has allies. I am just one man. You're not just one man, Ayana countered. You are Prince Cairo, heir to the throne of Orisa. And now your enemies know you are alive. Whether you fight or not, war is coming. You have a choice. Stay in hiding and let your people suffer, or rise and take back what is rightfully yours. Malik's eyes locked onto hers, searching for something, doubt, hesitation, fear. But there was none. Ayana was resolved. Would you really risk everything for this? He asked quietly. For you? For the people suffering under your uncle's rule? Yes, she said without hesitation. Malik let out a slow breath, as if finally accepting what had been inevitable all along. Then there's no turning back, he said. Orisa must rise again. Ayana reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. And we'll do it together. Leaving the village was not easy. The place that had been their sanctuary was now too dangerous to stay in. Malik, Prince Cairo, had been discovered, and his uncle's forces would not stop until he was eliminated. The only path forward was to reclaim his throne, but to do so he needed allies. Ayana packed quickly, knowing there was no time to waste. As they mounted their horses and looked back at the village one last time, she felt a pang of sadness. This was the only home she had ever known. Now she was stepping into a world of war, royalty, and danger, one she had never imagined for herself. Their first challenge came swiftly. Barely a day's ride from the village, they encountered a group of armed bandits blocking the narrow forest path. Malik reached for his sword, but Ayana placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. Let me try first, she whispered. She rode forward, her heart pounding. The leader of the bandits, a scarred man with piercing eyes, smirked at her. Turn around, little lady, he said. This road belongs to us now. Ayana sat tall in her saddle, her voice unwavering. And what do you gain from robbing travelers? Scraps of food? A few coins? I have a better offer. The bandits laughed, but she held their leader's gaze. You fight like desperate men with nothing to lose, she continued. But what if I told you that you could fight for something greater? That you could stand with a true king and change the fate of a kingdom? The leader narrowed his eyes. A king, you say? Ayana gestured toward Malik. This is Prince Cairo, the rightful heir to the throne of Orisa. His uncle stole his crown, and now we are gathering those brave enough to stand against tyranny. Do you want to keep living in the shadows, stealing from the weak? Or do you want to fight for a future where you are respected warriors? The bandits murmured among themselves. Malik watched, impressed. Ayana was no longer just the quiet village girl he had married. She was becoming something more. Finally the leader spoke. If your prince is telling the truth, we'll fight. But if this is a lie... He trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. It's not a lie, Malik said, his voice steady. Swear your loyalty and you'll be part of history. The bandits exchanged glances before one by one, they knelt before Malik. This was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Malik and Ayana traveled across the kingdom, seeking out those who still remembered the rightful king. They met with former generals who had been cast out of the royal court, villagers who had suffered under Zubari's rule, and warriors who longed to fight for something noble. But they were also hunted. Zubari's spies were everywhere. Twice, they were forced to flee in the dead of night when enemy soldiers arrived. Once, Ayana barely escaped an ambush by thinking quickly, leading their group through a hidden mountain pass while Malik held off their pursuers. Through every challenge, Ayana grew stronger. She learned to read maps, to strategize, to inspire people with words alone. She was no longer just a farmer's wife, she was a queen in the making. And as their army grew, so did hope. The time for battle was drawing near. The weight of leadership grew heavier with each passing day. Malik and Ayana had gathered a formidable force, but they knew the battle ahead would not be won with swords alone. It would be won through trust, strategy, and resilience. Yet trust was a fragile thing. One evening as they set up camp near the border of Orisa, word spread that an old friend of Malik's, General Sefiu, had arrived. Once a revered commander under Malik's father, Sefiu had vanished after Zubari took the throne. Now he stood before them, claiming to have rallied additional troops who wished to fight for their true king. Sefiu, Malik greeted, his voice thick with emotion. I thought you were lost to us. The kingdom needs you, my prince, Sefiu replied, kneeling before him. We all do. Malik embraced him, relieved to have an experienced strategist on their side. Ayana, however, watched warily. Something about the man's demeanor unsettled her, though she couldn't explain why. That night her instincts proved true. Just before dawn the camp was attacked. Soldiers bearing Zubari's crest stormed in, setting tents ablaze and cutting down those in their path. Malik fought fiercely, but the enemy had the advantage. They knew exactly where to strike. Someone had betrayed them. Ayana barely managed to escape the chaos, sprinting through the trees until she reached a safe vantage point. From there she saw the unthinkable, Sefiu standing beside Zubari's soldiers pointing toward Malik's tent. Rage and betrayal burned inside her, but she had no time to dwell on it. She had to act. Racing back into camp, she found Malik fending off 3 men at once. Blood dripped from a wound on his shoulder, yet he fought with the ferocity of a true warrior. It was Sefiu, she shouted, helping him take down an approaching enemy. He led them here. Malik's expression darkened, but he had no time to process the betrayal. More soldiers swarmed toward them. Together they fought their way to safety, their loyal warriors covering their retreat. By dawn the battle was over. Dozens of their men had been lost, and Sefiu had vanished into the night. The betrayal had cost them dearly, but they had survived. As Malik tended to his wounded soldiers, a messenger arrived bearing a parchment sealed with the royal crest. Malik unrolled it, his jaw tightening as he read. It was from Zubari. Surrender, the message read. Come to me alone and I will spare your woman. The word sent a chill through Ayana. Zubari wanted Malik gone, but he also saw her as a weakness, a bargaining chip. Malik's hands trembled with fury. He knows I won't let him harm you. I won't let you trade your life for mine, Ayana said firmly. We fight together. For the first time since their journey began, Malik hesitated. He had spent years running, believing that avoiding war would keep those he loved safe. But Ayana had changed him. She had shown him that survival was not enough. Justice had to be fought for. No more running, he finally said. The tension in the camp was thick. Everyone knew the final battle was near. The kingdom waited. Would the lost prince rise again? Or would Zubari's reign continue unchallenged? The answer would soon be revealed on the battlefield. The day of reckoning arrived with the first light of dawn. The sun cast long shadows over the fields as Malik's forces gathered outside the grand palace of Orisa, their armor glinting under the golden sky. The air was thick with tension, the kind that came before a storm. Today the kingdom's fate would be decided. Inside the palace walls, King Zubari's forces prepared for battle. They outnumbered Malik's army, but what they had in numbers they lacked in spirit. Many of Zubari's soldiers fought out of fear, while Malik's warriors fought for justice, for freedom, and for the true heir to the throne. Ayana stood among the villagers who had come to fight, her heart pounding. She had never imagined herself in the midst of war, but she had grown into something more than a farmer's wife. She was a leader, and today she would stand beside her husband until the end. A horn sounded. Malik raised his sword. For the kingdom. For our future. His soldiers roared in response, charging forward as the palace gates swung open. The battle erupted in a storm of clashing steel and battle cries. Malik fought at the front, his blade cutting through Zubari's warriors with unmatched precision. He was no longer hiding, he was the warrior prince he was always meant to be. Ayana moved through the battlefield, rallying villagers to stand their ground. Many of them were simple farmers and merchants, but they fought with the desperation of those who had been oppressed for too long. She climbed onto a fallen wagon and shouted, "This is our home. Fight for your families, fight for your future." The villagers surged forward with renewed strength. They outmaneuvered Zubari's soldiers, using the very streets and alleyways they had grown up in to their advantage. Inside the palace, Zubari sat on his throne, gripping the hilt of his sword. His advisor, a nervous man with shaking hands, turned to him. "Your Majesty, the battle is turning against us. The villagers are fighting back." Zubari sneered. "They are peasants. Let them throw their sticks and stones. I will cut down my nephew myself." He rose, his crimson robes flowing behind him as he strode toward the battlefield. Malik and his warriors pushed through the palace gates, taking the fight into the courtyard. The enemy forces were dwindling, but Zubari's elite guard stood their ground. Then the moment came. Zubari stepped forward, his sword drawn. "So, you finally crawl out of the dirt, nephew?" Malik's grip tightened around his weapon. "Your reign ends today, Zubari." They circled each other, blades ready. The battle around them seemed to fade as all eyes turned to the duel that would decide the fate of the kingdom. Zubari struck first, his blade moving like a serpent. Malik blocked and countered, their swords clashing in a dance of skill and fury. Sparks flew as steel met steel, neither man yielding. But Zubari was older, and though he was strong, his movements lacked the precision of a true warrior. He had spent years sitting on a stolen throne, growing complacent. Malik had spent years surviving, honing his strength. With a final, decisive strike, Malik disarmed Zubari, sending his sword flying across the courtyard. He held his blade to his uncle's throat. Zubari's chest heaved as he stared at his nephew. "You don't have the heart to kill me." Malik's eyes burned with resolve. "You're right. But your time as king is over." He turned to the people, raising his sword. "The tyrant has fallen." A roar erupted from the warriors and villagers alike. The battle was over. Zubari was dragged away, his fate to be decided by the people he had ruled with cruelty. As the sun set over the kingdom, Malik stood before the palace, victorious but weary. Ayana stepped beside him, taking his hand. "We won," she whispered. "Yes," Malik said. But he knew the cost had been great. Many had fallen, and the wounds of the kingdom would take time to heal. But for the first time in years, Orisa had hope. The true king had returned. The grand hall of the palace was alive with celebration. Vibrant banners hung from the towering columns, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. People from every corner of the kingdom had gathered to witness a moment they had long hoped for, the coronation of their true king. Malik stood at the center of the room, dressed in regal attire that felt both foreign and familiar. His journey had been long, filled with hardship, but now, as he looked at the faces of his people, he knew that every struggle had led to this moment. An elder stepped forward, holding the royal crown. The room fell silent as he placed it upon Malik's head. "Long live King Malik." The cheers erupted like a thunderous wave, shaking the walls of the palace. Drums beat, voices sang, and the people rejoiced. Their true ruler had returned. Beside Malik stood Ayana, her heart swelling with pride. She had once believed her life would be simple, a quiet existence in a small village tending to crops and raising a family. Yet, fate had chosen a different path for her. Now she was Queen Ayana, standing beside the man she loved, ready to help him rebuild a broken kingdom. The celebrations lasted for days, but Malik knew the true work was only beginning. The kingdom had suffered under Zubari's rule, and the scars of betrayal and war ran deep. He met with advisors, village leaders, and warriors who had fought by his side. They spoke of healing, of uniting the people, of ensuring that no ruler would ever again claim the throne through deception and cruelty. Ayana, too, found herself stepping into a role she had never imagined. She sat with the people, listening to their concerns, ensuring that the voices of farmers, merchants, and laborers were heard. She was no longer just a village girl, she was a queen who understood the struggles of the common people because she had once lived them. Late one evening, as the palace quieted, Malik and Ayana stood on the balcony, looking over the kingdom they now ruled. The stars shone brightly above them, as if the heavens themselves were blessing their reign. Ayana turned to Malik. "Did you ever think we would end up here?" Malik chuckled softly. "No. I thought I would live the rest of my days in the village, hiding from my past. But then I met you." She smiled. "And I thought I was marrying a simple farmer. Now we are here." He took her hand. "Together we will build a kingdom worthy of its people." And so, the story of the lost prince and the village girl who became queen spread across the land. Their tale became legend, a story of love, destiny, and the courage to embrace the unknown. For generations to come, the people of Orissa would remember the day their true king returned and the queen who stood by his side, turning fate into a future filled with hope.